Welcome to tonight's Terror, where you can expect original scary stories. Nothing here is written or narrated by AI. If you enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for visiting, and enjoy the story.
I should have known something was wrong long before they dropped me off. The red flags were everywhere when I look back on it now. I'd been too enchanted to see it. Enchanted by the romance of the wilderness. The little beam of spotlight that might shine on me when the show aired. And of course, the prize money. I watched the aluminum hull speedboat skip along the slate blue water and disappear around a point of land a quarter-mile down the coast. Vanished behind a rocky point veiled in spruce and shore pines. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of salt and cold stone. After exhaling deeply, I noticed the quiet. It rushed in to fill the void left by the whine of the boat's motor and pressed against me. I was completely alone. No other humans for miles and miles. The producers had assured me of that. Wild animals, toxic plants, extreme weather. Those things I would find in spades. But people? None. It was a game show of sorts. Maybe you've seen them. A call goes out for survivalists, outdoor enthusiasts, hikers, hunters, anyone who thinks they could live off-grid with limited supplies. If you have the skills, and I'll just say it, the ego, you might get the call. 3 months after sending off my video application, I got mine. I would be dropped in remote coastal Canada at the start of winter. The rules were simple. Outlast the other contestants and win $800,000. I never laid eyes on another contestant. The executive producer, a red-faced man of about 40 named Lazard, explained that my fellow survivalists would be placed at similarly unforgiving locations. We'd be scattered across the region, far enough apart to guarantee solitude, but close enough to face the same punishing weather. Solitude is going to blow the competition out of the water, Lazard had spouted during our first meeting after I'd made the cut. He was always moving as he spoke, around his office, in and out of the door to the waiting room, into the washroom off his office to run the sink for no reason I could discern. It was hard to follow his words as he jittered and paced around me. "Have you decided on your 10 items yet?" he asked, finally settling behind his desk. "I think so," I said, and began the list I'd been drafting and redrafting for weeks. Folding saw, paracord, sleeping bag, snare wire, medium axe, tarp, fixed blade knife, ferro rod, fishing line, and a bush pot for boiling water, cooking. Lazard ticked off the items on his fingers as I spoke, as if it gave him an excuse to keep moving even though he was seated. "Sounds like a winning formula," he said, in the rehearsed tone of an old-timey radio broadcaster. "Let's get you with the lawyers so you could sign the waivers and deal with the boring stuff." The offices should have been my first clue. Everything looked temporary. The furniture in the waiting room didn't match. Scuffs from the mover streaked the walls, unpainted and obvious. Bits of torn paper and fuzz on the carpets. When I think back on all the ways this production company was trying to tell me they weren't serious, what bothers me most was a flickering fluorescent light. It was twitching off and on right there in the lobby, 5 feet from the secretary's desk. It wasn't a real operation. I can see myself sitting at a folding table, Lazard over one shoulder, and the lawyer worrying over his phone in the corner. The lawyer was Lazard's opposite, silent, unanimated, and nearly catatonic throughout our meeting. I asked Lazard a question. "How can you be sure no one will wander into my camp? A hunter or a fisherman?" He glanced at the lawyer. "Care to answer that, Mr. Fellows? If you can be bothered to work while you bill me?" Fellows half mumbled a reply without looking up from his phone. We have leases." "Well, there you have it," Lazard said, rolling his eyes at the attorney. All of these instances would come back to me much later on. I can only say that nothing stuck long on my radar screen. I was so elated to have been chosen to compete on the show. I'd applied for 6 other seasons of similar contests and never even heard back. I looked at the lawyer, Fellows, another moment before carrying on with the paperwork. There was a hole in the leather of one of his loafers. Unserious people. And yet, there I sat, signing very serious papers for very unserious people, thinking only of some Jack London-style adventure and a pile of gold waiting at the end of it all. With a speedboat gone, I lugged my gear away from the shore. The crate with my 10 items sat waiting. Looking over the neatly folded tarp and bundled paracord, I felt ready. My hand rested on the ferro rod, and I thought about how cold the nights would be. I had practiced endlessly with this kind of fire starter, and I wasn't worried about producing heat. The shriek of a water bird drew my attention to the beach. Fog had started to creep over the sliver of frigid Pacific that stretched as far as I could see in both directions. The mist moved in quickly, gray fingers reaching over the water. The heavier crate held the camera equipment. I'd watched seasons of similar shows for years, and I knew how often contestants underestimated the time and effort it took to film everything they did. Solitude, the show's title, meant exactly that. No camera crew crouched in the trees, no one nearby to capture the moment I caught a fish or built a shelter. All the tech gear was packed in molded styrofoam to protect it from the ride in. The satellite phone sat beside it. I was expected to check in once a day with the field producers at home base miles away. Lazard had explained that I'd receive a 2-word response from headquarters. Good check. Nothing more. No conversation, no social contact. Anything to ensure the show tested our mental endurance as much as our survival skills. I'd seen dozens of people tap out on these shows, undone by nothing more than the loneliness. Lazard had said the cameras would auto-upload through satellite link whenever possible, but that we'd also store footage locally in case of signal loss. He hadn't said how often they'd be monitoring us, but he proudly crowed, "We can see everything in real time. That's what makes Solitude different. We'll edit and air episodes while you're still out in the bush. You'll be famous before you even get back." The phrasing had been hollow, almost like he was reading from a script he didn't fully understand. As I scouted the area for a decent campsite, I found myself wondering where the home base even was. I'd been blindfolded for the 2-hour boat ride, and all I knew was that I'd been dropped along a Pacific inlet on the British Columbia coast, somewhere north of Vancouver Island. The departure had been chaotic, shouting among producers, the base camp team, and the boat pilot. I'd gotten the impression that the pilot didn't even know he was working for a TV show. Twice I heard him ask, "What's all this camera gear gonna weigh?" At the time, I brushed it off, assuming it was hard to find reliable transport this far out. It wasn't until I was nearly done with my A-frame tarp shelter that I thought again about that pilot. In theory, if I used the satellite phone to call for help, the production team was supposed to race to my location with medics in tow. But the man who'd brought me here hadn't seemed to know what Solitude was. How could the producers be sure they had access to rescue boats when they needed them? As unsettling as that thought was, I had too much to do to dwell on it. I got back to gathering firewood. It would be a week before I noticed the next crack in the foundation of this whole enterprise. The first several days were unremarkable. I know that's odd to say given the drama of the situation and the stakes of the show, but things were just fine. I collected plenty of water and firewood. I slept reasonably well, and I caught 2 coho salmon. I even had the energy to wander a bit and set a few snare traps. Despite the constant physical work, hauling driftwood, tending the fire, checking lines, my thoughts were free to wander. I thought about home most often, mostly about my parents. When I pictured winning, I always imagined the moment I could tell them their mortgage was gone. They'd struggled to make ends meet in their old age. My father had sheepishly asked me for help paying for prescriptions more than once over the past year. They weren't destitute, but they were always one burst pipe or car accident away from real trouble. To win this contest and take care of them in a lasting way would mean everything. I'd struggled to find stable work since college, and I knew I'd never have my hands on enough money all at once to make their worries disappear. Not unless I could win this thing. For a few days, I thought I had the place figured out. Then, the wilderness reminded me who was in charge. The weather began to turn. Not a blizzard, though I might have preferred one. It came as freezing rain, hard and relentless, the drops hitting like ball bearings against my skin and skull. I was colder than I ever been in my life. Drying out and bringing my core temperature back up inside the shelter took hours each day. After a few rounds of that, I began to worry about food. It was nearly impossible to spend more than a few minutes outside before I had to surrender again and bury myself in my sleeping bag. When nature stopped cooperating, I finally understood why so many people failed on these shows. The loneliness was real. The nights were worse than the days. I'd record a quick video recap of the day while hunkered in my sleeping bag, and then lie awake, listening. I knew I was the only person for miles, but I couldn't help straining my ears for the whine of a boat's motor or the distant prop of a seaplane. Anything to remind me I wasn't the last person on Earth. During the day, constantly relocating and positioning cameras to keep myself in frame as I worked was a pain. But after a while, they became my companions. I talked to them constantly, narrating what I was doing, thinking aloud, filling the silence with words that evaporated as soon as they left my mouth. I'm going to check my wire traps now and then again before sunset, I announced to the blinking red light on the camera's matte black shell. If we've been lucky, without realizing it, I'd started referring to the cameras and me as sort of a team. We'll have a horseshoe hare or a grouse. I approached the camera sitting on the trunk of a felled tree. Or, I continued, we're a bit less lucky and get a squirrel. I lifted the camera and looked straight into the lens. Widening my eyes theatrically, I whispered, or no luck at all. We get nothing. The battery icon flashed in the corner of the viewfinder. You're getting hungry too, huh? I said. I'd need to swap the battery before heading out to check the snares. The top layer of styrofoam in the equipment case had held the cameras, the satellite phone, and one spare battery. The layer beneath it contained more than 24 camera batteries and 3 backups for the satellite phone. I slid my fingers between the case and the padding and pulled. The layer of molded foam came out easily. I looked into the case and squinted, unsure at first what I was seeing. The rows of slots in the styrofoam were empty. I dropped to my knees in the fallen pine needles and tugged at the black padding. Tucked into one of the empty slots was a single sheet of paper, folded in half to fit the battery-sized space. I pulled it out and unfolded it. It was an inventory list for the case. Lithium-ion primary cell battery, 26. High-capacity lithium-ion battery, 4. Someone had tucked the inventory list into my case and forgotten about it. For a while, I just sat there with the paper in my hand. The rain had eased, but the drops still fell from the trees in slow, uneven beats. Each one landed with a hollow tap on the lid of the crate. I read the inventory again, tracing the lines with my finger as if I'd missed something obvious. 26 camera batteries, 4 satellite phone backup batteries. None of them here. I told myself the mistake was a simple one. Some mix-up during packing, a last-minute shuffle between contestants' gear. Maybe somebody on the crew had borrowed them for charging and forgotten to put them back. But the more I tried to reason it out, the less sense it made. I remembered the chaos at the dock before we left, the shouting, the confusion over supplies, the baffled pilots' questions. They'd been in a rush, sure, but not careless enough to send a contestant into the wilderness without power, not without checking, not without redundancy. The thought astounded me. The back of my neck grew hot with fury. Someone had signed off on my gear, initialed a manifest, handed it over with a smile and a thumbs up. How do you miss 26 batteries? How are you not triple sure the satellite phone will work? The paper was damp and soft now, the ink beginning to blur. I folded the list and tucked it back into my jacket pocket. I was caught between fury and instinct, half wanting to tear the place apart, half thinking how to survive. Dark possibilities rushed in. Anything could happen to me now. I would start writing dates on the back. Times, weather, what failed, figuring someone might need a record if I didn't make it out of here. The burning heat on the back of my neck wasn't just anger. It was something worse. Something any trained survivalist recognizes as a death knell in an emergency situation. Panic. As the day closed, I'd calmed down enough to think straight. Panic never helped anyone. I still had water, fire, shelter, and some food. The missing batteries were a problem, not a disaster. Not yet. There were a few spares in the cameras. I could ration them if I was careful. For a while. I had to fulfill my filming obligation as a contestant. All I really needed was confirmation that the crew knew. Once I told them, they'd fix it. That's how these shows worked. I took the satellite phone from the crate and sat near the fire. The plastic felt slick in the damp air. I pressed the power button and waited for the screen to blink alive. The signal bar appeared, thin but steady. I scrolled to the preset frequency labeled Daily Check-In and hit Talk. Base, this is contestant 6, I said. I have a problem. The backup camera and satellite phone batteries are missing from my crate. Please confirm you copy. Static. Then the familiar male voice, flat and calm as always.
Good check.
I frowned and pressed the button to speak again. Negative, not a check-in. I'm missing equipment. 26 camera batteries, 4 for the phone. Please confirm you read me.
Good check.
I stared at the small green display on the phone. The signal bar remained. You're not understanding me, I said. I need replacements. Repeat, replacements.
Good check.
The same exact words. Same rhythm. I waited a full minute before speaking again. Is this pre-recorded? Silence. The phone hissed softly. Nothing else. Say something else, I said. Anything, just so I know you're there. Nothing. The signal bar hadn't moved. I powered off, then on again. Reconnected. Station base, do you copy?
Good check.
Unreal, I thought. Then, aloud, there's no one there. When I finally shut the phone off, I lay on my back with my eyes closed, trying to breathe evenly. Rain had started again, gathering on the fir tree boughs and slipping down to tap on my tarp shelter roof. Sounded like someone knocking. Slow, polite, waiting for me to answer. By first light, I convinced myself it was nothing. A glitch, maybe. Some preloaded message that triggered automatically. It was outrageous to think the production team would ever let something like that stand as standard procedure. But the list of reasons this operation felt less and less legitimate was growing. The important thing was that the signal bar had been steady. That meant the phone worked. That meant someone, somewhere, could hear me. I said those sentences out loud while I boiled water and tried not to think about how long the night had felt. The rain had stopped, leaving the forest slick and silent. I ate a small piece of smoked fish and decided to try the phone again. Station base, contestant 6, I said. Good morning. Yesterday's check-in didn't go through properly. I need to report a supply issue. Please confirm. Static. Then the same voice.
Good check.
I waited a few seconds and spoke again, losing my patience. Negative. Not a check-in. This is a report. I'm heading towards an SOS here, assholes.
Good check.
The tone hadn't changed, of course, not a single syllable off from the night before. I listened closely, hoping for the sound of breathing, a pause, anything human. The line was so clean, it was just a loop. I tried again later, mid-morning, when the fog began to lift. Station base, contestant 6, please respond with any phrase other than good check.
Good check.
That was when my forced calm started to break. I powered the phone off, then back on just to prove to myself it was an issue on their end. Back came the same 2 words, faithfully, exactly, uselessly. The phrase had become a taunt. By early afternoon, I'd stopped pretending anything about this was reasonable. If someone was monitoring, they knew about the missing supplies by now. The silence on their end could only mean one of 2 things. Either the system had failed, or they didn't care. Both outcomes could result in my death. I sat near the fire and scanned the inlet for any sign of a boat. The tide had gone out, leaving a line of dark kelp and wet stone. The sky was low and colorless. The air was still heavy with the threat of more rain. The quiet had a sinister weight to it again. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. It wasn't much of one, but it gave me something to do, besides wait for the good check. If the production team was monitoring the footage in real time, or close to it, they'd see whatever I did next. The first test was simple. I held down the transmit button on the satellite phone and stayed silent for a full minute, watching the timer on the screen tick upward. When I released it, there was nothing. No good check, just a hiss of static before the line went dead. The next time I spoke nonsense. Station base, contestant 6, pancakes, Bigfoot, ultraviolet. I paused. Repeat, pancakes, Bigfoot, ultraviolet.
Good check.
I let out a short laugh that didn't sound right coming out of me. I tried again, whispering this time, as if that might confuse the algorithm or force a human to step in. I got the same result. I switched the phone off and set it beside the fire. Then I turned to the cameras. Each one had a red light that blinked when recording. If the uploads really were automatic, someone back at base would see whatever I filmed as soon as the connection allowed. That was what Lazard had said, at least. I propped a camera on its tripod and pointed it toward the beach. Then I stepped into frame and said, "Station base, if you can see this, I'm missing camera batteries and the backup power for my satellite phone. I need confirmation you're receiving any of this." I waited. Nothing changed. The red light kept blinking. I covered the lens with my hat and left it that way for a while. When I pulled my hat off, the light blinked, just as before, steady and indifferent. It was possible that the footage was stored locally and uploaded later, but the longer I stood there, the less I believed it. Lazard's voice came back to me. "We'll see everything in real time. That's what makes Solitude different." But if that had been true, someone would have said something by now. That afternoon, I carried a camera to the ridge behind camp. From there, I could see the inlet stretching north, a gray sheet of water broken by the outlines of tiny islands. I set the camera on a rock and faced it toward the open water. "If anyone's watching," I said, "send a signal, a flare, a horn, anything. Do it." The demand sounded strange in the open air, small and toothless. I waited until the fog thickened again and the water lost its color. No flare appeared. No sound but the distant shush of waves on the beach. When I went back to camp, the fire was almost out. I fed it a few sticks and crouched beside the heat, rubbing my hands together. Somewhere out on the water, a gull called out once and went quiet again. I stayed by the fire until the light thinned to black. The fog had broken, but the air still carried a damp that never left. I'd grown used to the rhythm of filming, short clips of whatever I was doing that day, a few words into the camera before dark. But that evening I wanted to review what I'd recorded. Maybe I could spot something I'd missed. Maybe I'd see the flare I'd asked for and just not noticed it. The small display on the camera was smudged with rain and ash from the fire. I wiped it with my sleeve and scrolled back through the day's clips. The path to my traps, the low clouds, my own face framed by the trees. Everything looked normal. Then, somewhere between one clip and the next, I noticed a break. The time code jumped ahead 27 minutes. I hadn't stopped filming for more than a few seconds, but the feed skipped forward as if the camera had been paused and restarted. I frowned and rewound, thinking I'd misread it. No, there it was. It's a clean cut. I played the gap 3 times, though there was nothing to see. The clip before the gap ended with me adjusting the tripod. The next began with me standing several feet away, the light a little different. The fire was higher. My own voice came faintly through the speaker. All right, that should do it. I didn't remember saying that. I checked the second camera, the one I'd left near the beach earlier. Its footage should have shown me climbing the ridge, setting up the other camera. Instead, it showed the shoreline, fog, driftwood, water. The usual. But when I paused and advanced frame by frame, I caught movement. A shape passed through the frame, narrow, upright, but too fast to track. Shadow between 2 trees. It could have been the wind moving undergrowth or a trick of the light, but it looked too solid. Told myself it was nothing. A glitch, smear of fog, my own reflection. The woods outside had gone dark by then. The fire popped and threw light against the tarp. I rewound again and turned the volume up. Under the faint wind on the recording, I heard something else. A breath. Just one, drawn close to the microphone. When I shut the camera off, my fire seemed smaller than before. When I finally crawled into the shelter, the fire had burned down to a mound of orange coals. I left one of the cameras aimed at the opening of my A-frame home, recording, its red light winking in the dark. The light was small enough that it didn't feel intrusive, more like a single ember that refused to die. It faced the fire and the line of trees beyond, so if anything moved out there, I'd have it on film. The wind had picked up, came off the water in slow, heavy gusts that pushed through the trees and made the tarp flex and sigh. I lay there listening, counting the pauses between each burst to lull myself to sleep. The forest moved like a living thing, branches shifting, faint wisp of needles falling to the earth. I told myself I was hearing the same sounds as every other night. Then I caught something else, a faint, dry tap. Then another, closer. It didn't fit with the wind or the branches. It's too sharp. I tried to place it, but the sound kept stopping just when I thought I'd fix my mind on it. I held my breath and waited. The wind eased. The tapping stopped. I exhaled and turned onto my side facing the camera. Its red light blinked again, steady as a heartbeat. I must have drifted for a while because when I opened my eyes, the fire was out. The forest had gone still, in a way that made the silence feel heavier than the noise. The tarp had stopped shifting and ticking without the wind. I looked at the camera. The red light was gone. I sat up, fast, my head crunching against the tarp's plastic. The camera was still there, its lens pointed toward me. The power light was off. I pressed the button. Nothing. I checked the other cameras. Same thing. Every one of them was dead. The batteries couldn't have drained all at once. That wasn't possible. I found the satellite phone in my pack and pressed the power switch. It stayed black. The battery hadn't been low. Not yet. I shook it, held it up to the light from my headlamp, and tried again. Nothing. Suddenly more wary of battery life, I clicked off my headlamp and sat in the dark, listening to my pulse. Then, faintly, from somewhere near the water, I heard the sound again. A single tap. Then another, farther off. I waited for the next one. It never came. By morning, the fog had cleared enough to see the far side where the tree line met the water. My shelter and the beach looked unchanged, but everything else felt shifted somehow, like the world had been taken apart and put back together with one piece off. I rebuilt the fire and set a pot of water to boil, just for the sound. The phone was still dead, cameras too. I checked each battery, swapping them out for my few spares. Nothing. I set one near the fire, hoping the warmth would dry out any condensation. When the lens fogged, I wiped it with my sleeve, and for a second I saw my reflection in the glass. I saw a pale, hollow-eyed stranger wearing my jacket. I realized I couldn't remember when I'd last eaten. By afternoon, the batteries were alive again, evidently by warming up. The phone remained dead. I took a camera with me and headed to the beach, suddenly hungry. With a break in the rain, maybe I could hook another salmon. That's when I noticed something in the sand. A line of marks led from the tree line down to the water. They were shallow but clear, like something had been dragged. A stick, maybe, or the toe of a boot. I followed this Morse code in the sand a few yards until it broke off at the tide line. There were no prints. Nothing else disturbed. I told myself I'd done it the night before. Maybe I'd gone down for some driftwood to burn. I couldn't remember. I wouldn't fish this morning. Walking back to my camp, I turned the camera over in my hands and pressed the power button. This time the light blinked. Once. Then again. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. The display came alive, the time code running. I scrolled back to the last saved file, the one from the night before. It had a timestamp just after midnight. I hit play. The first few seconds showed nothing but the dim shape of the fire as it burned down. Then, the lens jerked sharply, as if someone had grabbed the tripod. The frame swung wildly until the camera faced the tarp with the fire in the foreground. Beyond the flames and inside the tent, I saw me. The clip ran 29 minutes, nearly a half hour of me sleeping. I sat on my sleeping bag and watched it through. Studying my face for so long, I noticed how thin my cheeks looked. Then, around the 28-minute mark, sound. Faint shuffle, the hiss of fabric. Then, close to the microphone, a breath. I gasped and sat up. Gathering my knees to my chest, I drew the knife from the sheath strapped to my leg. I stared out the opening of my shelter for what could have been an hour. Then I watched the clip again, frame by frame. The breath was human for sure. The last moments of the clip were me, lying in the shelter, one arm over my eyes, the fire beside me. The camera had been angled just enough to catch my face. My mouth hung open, teeth showing like I'd been caught mid-sentence. I watched myself roll onto my side. The fire beside me flared as if it had been fed a handful of bark. Then, a voice. So close to the microphone, the words were unmistakable. Good check. The recording ended. I sat back, staring at the camera. The red light blinked, steady and slow, like it was waiting for me to say something back. I sat up by the fire with a knife across my knees through the night, watching the tree line until the gray light came. By morning, I'd talked myself into an explanation. Someone was out there, a local fisherman maybe, or one of the crew sent to check on me. Whoever it was had a screw loose. Someone had filmed me while I slept. And if they were still nearby, I'd find them. I walked to the beach first. The tide had pulled back farther than usual, leaving a slick mat of kelp and sand. I moved slowly, scanning for prints, anything human. Nothing but gull tracks and long trails of driftwood dragged by the tide. Then I cut into the trees behind camp, following the slope upwards. About 50 yards in, I found a boot print. It wasn't mine. The tread was wrong, wider, heavier. The print was deep, the edges still sharp. Someone had been here within the last day or so. I called out, "Hey!" My voice came back, flat, through the trees. I waited a minute, listening. Nothing. A little farther on, I found another print, then another. The trail zigzagged between trunks and disappeared where the ground turned to rock. I turned back toward camp. From there, I could see the tarp, the smoke from the fire curling upward. I decided to ignore the fact that the light was dying. I wasn't going to stop when the tracks ended. I moved north, along the ridge for an hour with no real plan, exhausted and scarcely thinking. I knew I couldn't pass another night waiting for someone to set upon me while I was bundled in a sleeping bag. Then I smelled smoke. A thin thread of it rose beyond the trees 100 yards ahead. I crept closer. Soon I saw that the smoke came from a small ring of stones on the beach. Cautiously I approached the abandoned fire. There were bones in the ash, fish vertebrae, the curve of a bird wing. Then, just outside, I saw something worse. One of my cameras, cracked, the lens blackened from heat. A voice came from behind the trees. "I wondered how long you'd play around in your campsite before getting brave." I turned. A man stood half in shadow, bearded, dressed for the cold. I noticed there was no logo on his jacket. He didn't carry a pack. "Are you with Solitude?" I asked. My voice came out strange, too high. He didn't answer. He just smiled like I'd said something funny and nodded toward the ruined camera. "Oh, this is Solitude, all right." Then I noticed the bow. It was a powerful, compound type, favored by serious hunters. It was painted deep green and leaning against the man's leg. He saw me looking at it. "Oh, relax," he muttered softly. "I didn't think anyone else was out here," I said. "Just about no one," he replied. "That's why I favor it." He stepped forward, his boots settling into the wet sand. "You're the one they dropped off, huh? The contestant?" I didn't answer. He smiled wider. "You all think you're the first ones. The premier season," he said in a mocking tone. "Cameras, sponsored gear, fancy knives. The watchers love that." "Watchers?" I asked, but he carried on, undeterred. "You want to win, don't you? That's the hook. Outlast them all. And I bet you could, if there were anyone here playing but you right now." I felt my grip tighten on the knife handle. "I don't understand." He tilted his head as if listening for something. "Come on, put it together. You saw the footprints. You heard me. You even caught me on camera, didn't you? You're better than most. Usually they don't notice me until it's too late." My throat went dry. "Who? What happened to them?" He shrugged. "Same thing happens every time. When the batteries die, when the signal cuts out, when no one answers the phone. They get bold, start to wonder, start to wander, just like you did." He bent, picked up a piece of driftwood and tossed it into the fire. The flames jumped and painted his face orange. "It's what they want, the tension. But I guess things are moving pretty slow this time. I'm playing with my food, so to speak." My mouth fell open. His expression softened, his lower lip pushed out comically. "Don't look so down," he said softly. You've already made it longer than the last one." Something in his tone, something like genuine pride, made my stomach turn. "Anyway," he said, lifting the bow with one hand, "you should get moving. The tide's turning." "What do you mean?" He looked past me toward the beach. "Look there. If you stay, you'll be underwater by dark." I knew the tides by then. He was wrong. It was a line to make me turn my head. I did it anyway. When I turned to look, the shore was empty. When I faced him again, he was gone. For a long moment, I just stood there staring at the spot where he'd been. "Hello?" I called. The word came out thin, swallowed up by the trees. I stepped toward the fire ring. The bones and the ruined camera were still there. The driftwood he'd thrown on the coals still smoldered faintly. I crouched to touch the camera, half expecting it to be hot. It was cool. The lens cracked in a perfect spiderweb pattern. Then I heard him again. "Still here?" The voice came from somewhere in the trees, not far. I froze. "I don't want any trouble," he said. "I'm just here for the show." "That's what they all say," called back. "That's what I said." A chill moved through me that had nothing to do with the weather. "What? You work for them?" He laughed. It was a real laugh. Loud, startling, but it cut off fast. "Work. That's one way to put it." Branches shifted. I turned to the tree line, knife raised, but there was no one there. His voice cut through the gloom again. "They're here, you know. The real cameras. They just keep rolling. You keep up the good work. You feed them, they feed me." I stepped backward toward the beach. "Don't," he said. It wasn't shouted. It was calm, like an order he knew I'd obey. "If you run before I tell you, you'll make it worse." Every muscle in my body screamed to bolt, but I stayed still, the knife handle hot in my hand. "Then what do you want?" I demanded. "You still haven't figured it out, have you?" he said. "Well, let's get this over with. There's no prize money. Hell, I won once. You know what I got? This. Still breathing." "What are you talking about?" I stammered. "You're the entertainment. That's all. These rich sickos like watching the hopeful ones best. You've been a hit. So industrious, full of spunk." The meaning of his words wouldn't crystallize in my mind until later. Before I could process what he'd said, I heard a high-pitched whistle from the trees. An arrow hissed down into the campfire at my feet. The driftwood exploded. Sparks erupted in a plume of red. I ran. I don't know the day or time anymore. I've been running and hiding for at least 3 nights. The man with the bow is still out there, toying with me. I don't know when he's going to end things. I think the audio is still recording on this thing. The lens is shot, so I know you can't see me, but there's a gash down the left side of my head where an arrow nearly got me. It stopped bleeding. I'm not worried about infection. I don't think I'll last that long. If the people who brought me here find this, then I have a message for you. You're going to burn in hell. I've written what I could on the back of the inventory paper. The dates until I lost track. What happened and when. The SD cards are wrapped in plastic under the flat stone by the fire ring. If you find this, maybe you already found those. I don't know where I'll stash this last camera yet. Tell my mom and dad I love them, and I'm sorry. I followed the rules. I stayed where they left me. I made the calls. I would have won. I guess this is my last report. Good check.